Hello, I'm Rick Seaman, and the show is 11 Bravo. It's all about information and stories for and about our combat veterans. You know, combat vets and motorcycles have always been related in many ways. Soldiers returning from World War I, World War II, Korea, they found life on two wheels to be a great way to get their heads off the battlefields. Many Vietnam vets returned home, created an entire motorcycle culture with Harley-Davidson at the forefront. And even today, there are many Vietnam vet motorcycle organizations all around the USA. This same culture and lifestyle has been shared with the wives, children, and even the grandchildren of these veterans. And it's because of that motorcycle family tradition that I'd like to mention a book that I recently purchased, and it's titled The American Motorcycle Girls, 1900 to 1950. It's a photographic history of America's early women motorcyclists, written by Christine Simmons, three-time Motorcycle Hall of Fame inductee. There's also a foreword by Karen Davidson, the great-granddaughter of Harley-Davidson founder William A. Davidson. The book is filled with many really cool photographs and mini stories, as well as some historic news clips and ads for many of the early motorcycle companies. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you will as well. You can learn more about it by going to www.theamericanmotorcyclegirls.com. And here's another great book I would recommend. It's titled Distant War: Recollections of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. My guest today is the author of Distant War, a book that brings us back to those times we will never forget, and it bridges the 40 years since our days in that place. He will join us in a moment. We'll be right back.
What does the spiraling violence mean for Iraq's young democracy?
There is a lot of danger in Iraq. The surge in roadside bombings.
All tensions here are ratcheting up. The U.S. military has had to adapt its tactics.
How is it affecting troops on the ground in Iraq?
My name is Paul Rykoff. I'm an Iraq war veteran and the executive director of IAVA. I led an infantry platoon in Baghdad from 2003 to 2004. When I got home, I saw an America that was living life uninterrupted.
TV exorcism. Tom Cruise's new Scientology confession.
And this didn't look like a country that was at war.
We are back, 11 Bravo, and joining me here is my guest, Mark Jablonka, who is the author of Distant War. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with you.
So, Mark is a longtime military journalist, and with Distant War, Mark, you've covered a lot of the years after the Vietnam War, pretty much up to current.
Right.
And also you got interviews from the Vietnam War itself during the war. So,
Yes.
so it makes for a great in-between, now and then type of book. I really like the cover, the shot of the helicopter. I'm sure a lot of you vets, combat vets, grunts like myself, saw that at one time. And when I saw the book, Mark, that's what caught my eye.
Well, it's
It was
interesting.
haunting.
Interesting how that came about. I was not in Vietnam during the war, but I have been in Vietnam 3 times since. And I took that picture at Cu Chi, near the infamous Cu Chi tunnels that all of you Vietnam vets know about. And right outside the tunnels, which I went down a couple levels into, I spotted this helicopter, and I knew I had to get that shot. And when I was writing the book, I knew this had to be on the cover.
Right, right. So, you obviously have a great interest in the Vietnam War and Southeast Asia as a whole. Let's go back. When I was in Vietnam, 68, 69, you know, the hot years, tell me, where was Mark Blanca?
I was at the University of Oregon studying English literature.
Okay, okay.
1969, of course, the lottery came out, and I was lucky enough to have a high number, so I was never drafted. And then, of course,
Right.
1972, and by coincidence, I graduated from university, was the beginning of the end of American involvement in the
Right.
Vietnam War.
And what, was there any particular event that took place that kind of attached you to the Vietnam War? Because we know now you've definitely attached yourself to the Vietnam War with this book.
Yeah. I'd say two things happened. Number one, 1975, a short 6 months after Saigon fell on April 30th of that year, I took a job teaching English with the adult division of the Los Angeles Unified School District, a job that I still have today, as a matter of fact. And we started among the what they now call the salad bowl of different cultures that have come to Los Angeles and California, came that first wave of Vietnamese refugees, the ones that had landed at Camp Pendleton and were involved in the makeshift tent city down there. And I befriended a lot of these Vietnamese folks. They took me into their houses and began to tell me what I would say were horrific stories about fleeing Saigon, many of them in boats. That's one. The other was the film The Killing Fields, which I saw a couple years later, which was of course about the Cambodian extension of the Vietnam War.
Right.
And the story of Sidney Schanberg, New York Times columnist, and his Cambodian counterpart, Dith Pran. When I saw that film, I left the theater thinking that's what I wanted to be.
I read your book. I went back and reread a number of chapters in your book, and
Thank you.
you've covered so many areas. Your stories, your interviews involve Vietnamese after the war has ended, Cambodians, Laotians, a lot of the relationships that you made with a lot of these people. Their struggles through the years following the war. But you also interviewed a lot of Americans that were part of the war.
Yes, sir.
Special forces. You had one interview that I really enjoyed. It was about some of the Air America pilots.
Yeah.
Who are a very storied group of people.
Noted and notorious.
Noted and notorious. Tell our viewers about what you learned from those guys that's in this book as well.
Well, if there's one thing I learned, it's that they've been given short shrift. The Air America pilots that I have interviewed for several different publications as a journalist, who ended up in this book, to a person, feels that the reputation that they received as drug-running rogue pilots was undeserved. And indeed, if you look into the history and you read books about what Air America truly did, you know that they really helped to support our forces in Vietnam, and that the reputation they got via films such as the one called Air America with Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. Really did them more of a disservice. Made people laugh when they went to the theater, but did them more of a disservice than a service.
Also in the book, you have a chapter on Admiral Stockdale.
Yes.
Who was the highest-ranking naval officer to be captured and interned at the Hanoi Hilton. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, he had died before I ever received the assignment from Vietnam Magazine to do a story on him, which ended up in the book. What an incredible, remarkable human being to have endured so much suffering at the hands of the North Vietnamese captors. to have undergone time after time after time the infamous Vietnamese rope trick where the POWs had their hands tied behind their backs and their sockets rotated so that their shoulders would break. He was such a role model for the other POWs. I can't tell you, Rick. In the course of doing the original story, which is in the book, I had the chance and the honor to interview Senator John McCain on the phone, Ross Perot, people intricately and intimately involved in the whole POW experience. And to a person, they all felt that if it hadn't been for Jim Stockdale, they never would have made it out of the Hanoi Hilton alive.
Wow. You also devoted a chapter in your book to the Montagnard people.
Yes.
And you went back there and you got to learn a lot about them and about during the war and post-war.
Right. To a point, I think what I know of the Montagnards was taught me mostly by people who fought with them, like Army Major Jim Morris, a personal friend of mine who was with the 5th Special Forces Group. Jim taught me a lot about the Montagnards, meeting a lot of the Montagnards myself in North Carolina, where many of them immigrated to in past years, has taught me some. In my own efforts in Vietnam, 1995, my third trip back, to try to intermingle with the Montagnard community, were pretty much stymied. The government has its control on these people, largely because they're Christian and Catholic. And as the government did back then and even today, they see the Montagnards as different, they're discriminated against, and a thorn in the side of the Hanoi government. So if you intend to get into the Central Highlands where they're from, you need to sort of mind your P's and Q's. And I know that there are many relief organizations, and I contribute to one called the Friends of the Central Highlands of Vietnam that helps, for example, Montagnard orphans in the Catholic orphanages there. You really have to be careful in terms of, who you see and what you do.
All right. You mentioned that their migration here to the United States is centered around North Carolina.
Yes.
And I find that interesting.
I do too.
Would that be because of Fort Bragg?
How would
and our special forces?
What is it that they call Fayetteville, North Carolina? It's called Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, the Special Forces people in Fort Bragg, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Family Services, through the years have had a hand, whenever possible, of bringing the Montagnard people to the United States, and it hasn't always been easy. The United Nations has had to intervene to bring people of the Montagnard heritage who were actually hiding from the Hanoi government in the jungles of Cambodia over here to the United States and chiefly to North Carolina.
Yeah. And that Mark, that's a lot about what your book tells us that I read in this book is all this little stuff between the lines that a lot of people, even veterans, wouldn't even think about. Just like how Special Forces, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to this day is working, to help Montagnard people. I mean, that's amazing stuff that we don't hear about.
Right, and I think one of the things I endeavored in the writing of the book was to make the statement that war affects everybody. It certainly affects civilians in the countries in which we fight. It affects civilians who went there in our support. And I hope that I have succeeded in that mission of painting a picture of the total experience of what war means to everybody involved.
Right. Very interesting things we're hearing here from author Mark Jablonka. We're going to take a quick break. Be right back.
National Veterans Foundation is meeting the needs of veterans and their families and is continuously focused on expanding their efforts to provide real solutions for these American heroes. For more information about National Veterans Foundation, contact them today or visit their website at nvf.org.
11 Bravo, back again with Mark Jablonka, author of Distant War. Mark, in your book, you mention an encounter with game show host Pat Sajak.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
My interview with Pat was to be part of a bigger story that I had written that I was in the process of writing for American Veteran Magazine, the quarterly publication of the AMVETS Veterans Organization,
Right.
for which I was a contributing writer for 14 long years.
Wow.
Anyway, and Pat and I were supposed to talk for about 15 minutes. Well, that 15-minute interview ended up being 45 minutes, and so I was able to write a completely different profile of Pat, which ended up in Vietnam Magazine and is now a chapter in my book.
Right. And Pat Sajak was, in fact, a DJ on Armed Forces Radio Network Vietnam.
Right. Like, the movie Good Morning
Like the
Vietnam
movie. What-
about Adrian Cronauer.
Yeah.
Pat Sajak did the same thing, 0600 every morning.
What
Good
years?
Morning
What years
Vietnam.
did he do that?
I believe he was there from 68 to 70.
68 to 70.
Yeah, and I might say that his duty was not without danger. I mean,
No.
he was quartered, if I recall the story, at the Brinks Hotel, and the Brinks Hotel was bombed on a number of occasions.
Right.
He had a kind of a tedious task, though, because he was supposed to be on the air at 0600. The problem was Saigon had a curfew from, I think, 10 p.m. to 0600.
Right.
And so he ended up spending many a night, sleeping at the station so
Sure.
that he could, say good morning, Vietnam.
Just so he could say good morning to all us grunts out in the field. I remember the old rooster crowing and good morning, Vietnam. And it was Pat Sajak.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking 68 to 70,
Right.
that's when I was there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Who would have ever known?
Right,
We'd be watching him on Wheel of Fortune.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Right.
And there's probably a lot of other humorous stories and events that you experienced in your research in the book.
Absolutely, and it's interesting to me, and I guess you could philosophize that the reason that there is humor not in the act of war itself, but in the respite from the war,
Right.
is precisely because people like yourself, Vietnam veterans, you didn't need to dwell on the negative things.
Our sense of humor kept us
was
alive.
necessary. Certainly that was the
Kept us
case.
sane.
Sure. And certainly that was the case when I interviewed those gentlemen from Air America that we spoke about in the previous
Right,
segment.
right.
If you'll permit me, I'd like to read something to your audience if I can.
Oh, please do.
It came to me from Wendy Wingrove. Unfortunately, Wendy we lost Wendy a few years ago to an aneurysm. Very interesting personage in his own right. Was in Laos and Vietnam in the 50s and was Dr. Tom Dooley's personal pilot on loan from the Army.
Oh, really?
The famous Dr. Tom Dooley, who in the 50s administered to the health of the tribal people in Laos and Vietnam. Here's something from my book about Wendy Wingrove. Along with the pain and suffering that war brings, unbelievably, combatants are quick to point out, always a degree of humor that exudes from the camaraderie developed in combat situations. Air America personnel were no different in that regard. Wendy Wingrove, in Southeast Asia as early as 1959, proved that point many times over. While still a U.S. Army pilot, he was charged with flying around Laos in a well-used Piper Apache, the late volunteer Dr. Tom Dooley, who later wrote 3 books about the care he administered to the indigenous tribes of Southeast Asia during and after the French Indochina War. The plane had been a gift of the citizenry of St. Louis, Missouri. Wingrove, who joined Air America in 1965, stayed with the outfit until 1974, moved from thoughts of the doctor to laughter in no time. I flew pigs from one village to the next in Vietnam for 1 whole week, he says, over a bottle of Ba Mui Ba, 33 beer, the likes of which GIs drank in Vietnam. Every damn takeoff, it never failed. By the time I would get to the end of the runway, they would crap everywhere. The next week I flew rice around. I'll be damned if right after that rice didn't start growing right out of the floorboards of the plane. But Wingrove's treasure chest of stories did not stop with himself. Anybody ever tell you about Shaky Calhoun, he asked me. Shaky was a C-47 pilot. He smoked. In 1967, you weren't anybody in Air America unless you had a gold Rolex. They were $950 in those days. One day, while aloft, He took off his watch to admire it, got a cigarette, reached in his pocket, got a book of matches with only one match. He lit the cigarette and tossed the Rolex right out the window of his plane. The last time I saw him, he said, he was going to bronze that match and put it on his mantle for stupidity's sake. Great story, Wendy Wingrove.
Very, very good. Very good. Mark, what do you consider to be the most, let's say, moving of all the interviews you did in regards to the book?
There's a story in my book about when I was in Khe Sanh at the old battlefield in 1995. There I was observing where the siege of Khe Sanh took place, and out of nowhere came a Vietnamese national with a Marine tin chow plate full of U.S. Marine dog tags. In very broken English, he came to me and he said, "You pay me $2, $2, $2." And it was an affront to me. I said, "You ought to give me those to take back to my country to get them to the families of the soldiers and Marines who lost them on this battlefield." His response was $2, $2, $2. So I reached in my pocket, gave him $2 USD, and took a couple of dog tags home. When I got back to the United States in 1995, I endeavored to do everything I could to return those dog tags to either the veterans who wore them or the families. It was kind of curious to me because one of them looked what I would describe to be war-torn, like it had really been through a war. And the other looked a little bit more modern. I was fully aware at the time and have been made aware since then that phony dog tags is a cottage industry in Vietnam. My friend Steve Stibbons, who was also in the book, Marine Corps combat correspondent in Vietnam, has mentioned to me on a couple of occasions that you can walk down any alley in Saigon and see them cranking out phony dog tags. Well, as it turned out, one of the two, the war-torn one, was unsubstantiated by the U.S. Navy, whom I had sent the 2 dog tags to. But one of them was substantiated and sent to the family of the Marine who had worn it, a young man by the name of David Arnold. A couple years went by, I didn't think anything of it. And then one night, about 11 o'clock at night, during the week I get a call, and the person on the other end of the line said, "Are you Mark Yablanka?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You were in Vietnam?" And I said, "After the war." And I said to him, "Do I know you?" And he said, "No, I just wanted to call and thank you for returning my brother's dog tag."
Wow.
It had taken him 2 years, Rick, to get up the courage to call me on the phone. Now, he himself was just a young boy when his brother was killed at 19 years of age in Quang Tri province. So it was quite a moving thing, and it led to an article that I wrote for Stars and Stripes, which made its way into the book. And if we have time, I'd like to relate what happened to the other dog tag that was unsubstantiated. That's all right with you and your viewers.
And the one that was unsubstantiated was the one that looked the worst.
The worst.
Yeah.
And ironically, now, a few years after that, I read an article in Vietnam magazine about this very subject. There are researchers at JPAC and the POW-MIA Commission in Hawaii who are researching these things. And so I thought, well, let me contact these professors, these researchers, and see what comes of it. And I did not send the tag back, but I did give them all the information on it. Sure enough, real dog tag worn by a real Marine.
Wow.
They contacted the family. And again, time went by, no word. About a year ago, my wife and I were at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. And by that time, I'd given up hope of ever returning it to its rightful owner or his family. And I was sharing the story with a docent at the wall from the Forest Service. And he said, "Well, did you look in the book?" And sure enough, I looked in the book, and the Marine whose tag that was on the wall. So I had the honor, sad honor, profound honor, of leaving that second dog tag below his panel at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall.
Wow. We'll be right back. It's 11 Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot for all you guys have done.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back again, and with Mark Blanca and his book, Distant War, Recollections of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. How can our viewers get their hands and eyes on this book?
Well, the book is chiefly available online. The easiest way would be to go to Amazon.com, type in my name or Distant War, Recollections of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and do it through Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, or it's available directly from my publisher, Miriam Press, out of Vermont.
Yeah.
If your viewers go to www.miriam, and I'll spell that MERRIAM-press.com, they should be able to go to the Vietnam section and not only be able to get my book, but a lot of other great books about Vietnam and all of the conflicts that the United States has been involved with, involved in over the years.
Right. It's a good read. Mark, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and welcome home.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon, vets.